Alright, it's time to revisit some of the work we did last week, or a couple of days ago, during the Photoshop user presentation of PD Howler and Photoshop used together. In somewhere in that presentation, we focused on a sequence of images rendered by Daniel Beck, also known as Dartenbeck. He had sent us a great set of images from a spaceship that was kind of banking a little bit, and we loaded that into Dog Waffle and turned it into, first of all, also we converted this from a PNG to Targa, worked with it in a couple of ways, and here's what I did with it just recently, and I wanted to kind of focus on how to do that. In fact, in this segment I'll show how this background was created, or how you can create something very similar. The idea is something mystic, spatial, something cosmological is happening, maybe some explosion. There's some movement also. You see some particles flowing around, or maybe waves, maybe shock waves of plasma clouds. Definitely not a place where you want to steer your spaceship into. All right, so let's see how we did that. First of all, here's a look at, let's go hide this. Here's a look at the animation that's the background before we get busy with it. So this one is actually one of the first steps, and then I did a couple of further steps and transforms and filters and some fancy effects that I want to cover today. So let me start from scratch. What I'll do is I'll create this. I'll create a slightly smaller version just so it goes a little bit faster. Let's do a 640 by 360. And we'll create an animation of, you know what, let's start without an animation. So right now we have actually just a single frame, and I'm going to use a filter though that is in the animator group. Now this is actually something that you can use even if you don't do animations. You want to use the Howler edition for that. You can see the full screen preview, so it's previewing it in an animation. Even if in the end you really don't want to create an animation and you want just a still frame, a still image, it's great to have an animation sequence that takes you through many different positions or different possibilities, so you get to choose the one you like the best. And so that's one of the differences with the Howler edition versus the slightly feature-reduced artist edition, which is cheaper. With the Howler edition you get many more ways to create that perfect still image as well. Now what I'll do here is I'll change the size of the stars a little bit, increase the quantity of them, and I'll give it a little bit of a movement to the right. You see you can change a vector X speed here, and that will make it move a little bit. It appears to be moving from somewhere around here. Some of the stars seem to be drifting a little bit to the left, some of them come back to the right, so it's just about right there. And what we'll do is we'll have them go a little bit faster, and then we'll also add, let's go to the other tab here, novas and flares, and that's where you can add a little bit of glitter and some special umph. And one thing I'll do, actually I'll enable the lens flares, and I'll click on settings. So what you do is you choose one of the lens flares you want. Let's see, for instance, the one with the halo around it. There you go. And then close that. And then at that point you can play with the sizes and also how many of these bigger stars are actually showing it. So you can have very few of them, and that will go a little bit smoother. But if you reduce this to just 1 out in 12, a lot of these stars are going to show the lens flares. So be careful there not to overdo it, depending on the speed of your system, and also what lens flare settings you choose. Some of them go a little bit faster. Let's use this one, for instance. In fact, let's use this one. This one will give us a little bit of an impression of some plasma clouds moving around, like we have an explosive star or something like that. So that's what we're looking for. And so with this, we can use probably, let's keep them somewhat more of them, a little bit bigger. And let's go back to the stars and glows and perhaps change the speed, the number of stars. There you go. So that's basically what I did. Is I started, there's a lot of them here. It's a bit slower than I remember it, but you'll want to experiment with your system here to see how that plays. Let's give it a few more. Okay, so that would be the system. Now when you OK that and it sees that there's only one image frame, there's no animation to store that in, it just renders this one frame. What we really want to do is actually go to animation, create, and make this, oh, I don't know, let's say 88 frames. And go back, actually, now that we have that placeholder, this is not the image we want in it. We want to actually render that starry night right in there. It seems to remember the current settings, so we can probably just use that as is. Maybe adjust a little bit. There you go. Let me go just reduce the number of them that are producing those flares, so it'll just go a little bit faster for the sake of the demo. But I would definitely probably have I would take the time for the final work there to make this go a little bit richer. So right now I have these being rendered into the entire sequence of 88 frames, and that would be a first point at which I would recommend saving. So let's go to animation save. That's our internal save format, and I'm gonna go call that flares 2, since I had an earlier sequence here, flares 2, and also 88, indicating that we have 88 frames. So that's a quick memory dump, and we have it now in a file we can go back to. One place we'll go back to take that actually is in the swap buffer. So we can go and assign that from the animation menu, animated swap image, loading that DWA into it, or rather just like pointing at it. So what we'll need to do simply is find our file that we just saved, flares 288, and open it. And so at this point, the animation that's saved is going to be used in the swap buffer. We can now actually use the swap buffer to affect and modify or combine in some ways with the ones we have, with the image we have in the main buffer. And one way to do that will be interesting here would be to do something like displace by swap. If you do a displacement, the image that's in the swap buffer acts like a force field, and as you give it more and more, maybe too much of it, but a little bit there, it may look like you have some sort of a plasma cloud pattern with some turbulence there. Now this one applied on this one frame, we really want to apply that on the entire frame sequence, and both the images in the front as well as the same image in the background are actually moving. They don't have to be identical though, so we probably should actually make them a little bit different. So what I'll do is first go to the timeline, and what we'll do is I'll actually apply, let's go and undo this once. There you go. We'll apply a little bit of a Gaussian blur so we don't have it all exactly the same as the original. Let's go to the blur tool, and could be a Gaussian blur. That's a lot of blur. Let's not give that much, just a little bit. Okay, and apply that, and what you see is applying it through the entire image sequence. Alright, so now what I want to do is the same thing we did just before, a moment ago, with the displays, but this time from the timeline. So it's going to apply that across the entire sequence, and we can give it a little bit more displays, something like so, and do that. Maybe that's too much. Let's do a first pass like that. So that's one place to start exploring, doing some displacements on the images. Now there's other types of transforms we can do. We can use, for instance, one thing I would do is applying some blur that's a motion blur or a zoom blur, right? The zoom blur in particular, you can position it where you want, give it a little bit more intensity, quality too, and then that way you can perhaps make it look like somewhere around here is where the hotspot is, where the whole action starts from, where the star is kind of emanating from. So apply that, and you're starting to see a little bit of a zoom to that point there. Now sometimes I like to also add some mystic vision that will do kind of similar, but not just distorted, but also tear away the bright parts, so that can also add some nice effects, a little bit of a glow effects basically. Then maybe I'll go there to under the image menu to expand dynamic range to get better contrast, or perhaps I'll do that straight from the color value adjust menu. Right there you can adjust the gamma or the contrast, or increase the brightness a little bit. So you want to play a little bit with these and perhaps even remap a different gradient to it. Let's apply that, and now I'll even go back to doing some more transforms. What was it? The displacement. There's also a pool display that might be useful, and you know, you'll be surprised sometimes you get something that looks really handy dandy. One I'll do here is, let's say, displays, something like this, and apply that. So that's what I did, is I played with these parameters a little bit and applied some of the filters that would do some transforms, some blurring. Let's go back to the photographic one more time. Some dark diffusion, or no, not the photographic, but the dark vision. That's similar to the other one, but it looks a bit like volumetric shadows being cast. So it's kind of the equivalent to the mystic vision, but it is the dark vision. It has kind of the I call it the dark side of the mystic vision. It's basically giving a preference to the dark pixels and casting them, dragging them a little bit like a volumetric shadow effect. And so if we add that, let's go and apply that. And of course, all of these could also be keyframes, so you could change and vary the intensity of them. But at this point, we have some sort of a expanding cloud here. If you look at how this is moving, we still can tell that some particles were moving and like going across that. But more importantly, we can also see them being torn apart, and there's some sort of a blast or a force, apparently a wind force, you know, plasma wind or solar wind blasting them away. And you could, you know, do that more and more and add some more, go back to that original star field and add that on top again, or combine it from two separate clips. There's all sorts of different ways to make it more and more sophisticated here. Let's say here's at the bottom we have the composite with swap. We could do actually the one that's in the swap still. We could combine the two together and adjust a little bit, you know, how much do we see from one or the other. So we still see a little bit more of the individual stars here. If you zoom in here, you can see that it almost looks like space rock now. That's some debris that's flying across, because those are still visible in the swap buffer, right? So if you adjust the low clip a little bit and the high, you might actually get to see a bit more of the original image there too. So let's apply that. Yeah, let's keep that and apply that, and then perhaps see if we want to do one more time a little bit of a turbulent displacement here, displaced by swap. You know, it all looks like it's boiling and hot plasma exploding and so on. Perhaps one last one that I will do is, let's see, what did we have there? You know, a bit more blurring, mystic vision. No, we've done that. Oh, you know what? Maybe just adding now a bright star there, a lens flare. So let's go to the lens flare at the bottom and actually place it somewhere around that area where we say the whole cataclysm is emanating from, right? Where maybe there was a supernova just a split second ago, and we want to adjust how much of that supernova is still glowing there. Let's give it a different color, maybe this one here, and see what that looks like. Then that way we have the stars, actually the rays kind of changing over time as we adjust. Actually it's rotating with the position, but once that position is set, it's not moving, not rotating. So maybe we can move the position a little bit too. So let's keyframe it. Let's go from here, and perhaps here it's going to be lower intensity, but also slightly different position. Let's go around here, keyframe it, and then towards the end we move a little bit further even, but then increase the brightness again as well. Something like that. And so now we can apply that. And it's important to keep the save undos checked here, just so in case you do. Yeah, I definitely overdid it here, so I'm going to undo that, and perhaps I'll keep the brightness a little bit lower. Let's give it just very little at the beginning, keyframe that, and then here maybe I'll give it a blast, one last eruption there, something like this. But then it's shortly after that it's going to come back down. It has to come back down, so it's not too much of it. There you go. And then towards the end it's just fading away. This is the death of the star, so it's basically disappearing. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so that's usable. We can add other lens flares that we will perhaps composite on top if we want to. We could you know, go back to this one, for instance. Now this time we'll have to track it though. If we want it to be positioned there, we need to actually it is still on the same, so that's okay with that. That'll just be automatic. But you know, this is definitely a little bit too bright at this point, so let's just keep it with that. That will be our animation that we'll use as the background. Let's go save that one too. Because something, it will be good to have a different version to go back to. So this will be Flares 3. And now one thing I'd like to do is, you know, when we remember that original spacecraft animation, that one was 60 frames long. This one here is 88. I really want my animation to be longer though. So the frames that I will load into the brush. That's for the spaceship. So I'm going to load that from an image sequence. I actually did that earlier, and I saved it, stored it in my browser, in my media browser. So I'm going to click that, go to my animator brushes, and find Darton Beck's spaceship. There it is. And I think if I enable the preview, and yeah, there it is. Oops, I painted one too many times. Let's go undo that. There you go. So here's my spaceship, and I really want to have it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to set the brush to store and manage a copy of it here. And then I don't need the preview really. Well, actually I guess I should while I'm adjusting the size here. So I'm going to make it perhaps half the size roughly. It's rescaling the entire sequence. There you go. Actually, I could probably keep it a little bit bigger, because during the animation I will be using the brush keyframer, so I can move it along the path towards the star, but also make it smaller progressively, gradually smaller. And it is a brush that's animated, so what you can see, if I set the steps here to really small, like 0, 1, or 2, as I'm painting, it's actually going to cycle through the animation that's in my animator brush here. I have a sequence of 60 frames here. So let's go keep that in mind. That's good. Now I will need one more thing, which is to make this background animation a longer duration. I want that to last 3-4 times longer. Right. So right now it's 88 frames, or almost 90 frames, and that basically means it's going to be at 30 frames a second. It's going to last barely 3 seconds. I can set that to 30 frames a second. And sure enough, if we play it here, we can count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, boom, we have cycled through that in about 3 seconds. What I want to do is, therefore, to extend that, and we could do that with the time stretch under the frames menu. Right, same thing here. When you right click on that, frames menu, time stretch. Better quality though sometimes, and recommended is that you try this one. In this case, actually, under the animated menu, you have the motion prediction module. And one thing that's great about it is that sometimes when things move too fast, it's actually creating transitional side effects like distortions and turbulent effects. Well, in this case, this is actually welcome. This one is actually one that we will want to see. Some of these weird side effects. Well, when it moves too fast, it might be jumpy. So I'm not sure. Give it a try. If you have it go smoothly, maybe give it 5 times that many. Let's try a smaller fudge factor there. Yeah, no, it's a little bit too extreme, I think, on the movement. Although, it could be some shockwave effect there, if you think about it. So let's just keep that one off. Let's use the other technique, just because we haven't used it that much. The time stretch, which is where you basically fade 1 frame away and fade gradually into the next frame. And you can say how many times you want that to be, multiplied by 2, or you can just enter the exactly desired number of frame. So let's say we want 400 frames here. So that 400 frames with frame blending, don't forget that, is going to give us a longer duration now. You know, if it were 300 frames at 30 frames a second, that would be exactly 10 seconds. But this is even longer, so probably about 13 seconds and then some. And we can play it just to see. All right, that's good enough. We might want to make it a little bit darker, perhaps. So that's, you know, where you still have the timeline to adjust the contrast, brightness, and all that stuff. One that's a quick one to bring it darker under the photographic category is the day for night. That will reduce the contrast and dim it a little bit, almost like it's night vision or night light condition or moonlight condition. So I like to use that one at times, although, you know, the bright flares are not quite that bright anymore. So I'm usually tempted to bring another solar flare on top of it later on. But let's, you know, sometimes we talk about this just to get the exposure and be aware of it, and it might not necessarily be the best thing to do. So let's click undo and go back to what we had before with better contrast. One that I would perhaps actually really use here under the photographic filter collection is the soft contrast improvement. That one sometimes gives it a really nice mystical look, and I don't know if I'll get it here in this one, but let's try here. What do we see? Yeah, it's going to be possible to make sure it's not too bright all over. And look at that, you can actually animate that across the whole sequence. So it's applying that same contrast improvement, the soft contrast improvement, to the entire frame sequence. All right, so and you know, if you needed some extra animation or movement on the entire scene, you could do that right there too. In the timeline, you could go to, where is it, transform. Come on, a little bit further down there. Transform, there it is, and select the transform filter, where you can move this around, and you can also scale it up, so you can gradually zoom in and move a little bit, or perhaps even change the angle without seeing that edge on the side there. So let's click reset. Let's go to the first frame and keyframe that one, and then somewhere here we'll be zooming in a little bit. So we're building up some margin that we can then play through, and then over here we'll perhaps move a bit to the other side. And even give it a slight tilt. Let's give it a little bit of rotation there. Something like this. Alright. No, actually, you know what? That would be at the end, after we've composited the spaceship. So let's keep it like this, and keyframe and apply that. So now we have yet another version of this animation. So this one I'm going to now settle with and for, and I'm going to save that. Will be probably flares 4. And it's no longer 88 frames, it's now 400 frames long. There you go, save that one. All right, now the background animation of those stars that we still have going on there, that we have occasionally used for displacement, we don't need those anymore, so we can go to the animator swap and uncheck this. And now we are left with just this one animation. And that's where we will now take the spacecraft, courtesy of Darton Beck, and place him somewhere here. Now, I know one cheap way to do that is you hold the Alt key down, you set the step distance here perhaps to 5 or 6 or something like that, and then hold the Alt key down and play along with the Alt key. But that's going to, you know, it's going to move pretty quickly across here, and that's not exactly, well, you know what, that could be actually what you want if you want the whole armada of these spaceships. Let's do that. Let's try some really small ones. There they are. And have them go really slowly because they're farther away. So we'll set the step distance to 2, and let's zoom out a little bit. There you go. And, or no, show it at 100% even. That way we don't incur any performance loss for the extra zooming during the viewing operation. And so now hold the Alt key down and just paint from the outside across this. See, like that. And then do another one over here. And another one. And so there's a whole army of spaceships coming across there now. And maybe we'll have even a few really small ones there. Let's give this one like so. There you go. And so that one is going to go like that. And actually, we really should have done this in a different order, right? I mean, obviously the small ones, the far ones, could be covered or hidden by the big ones that go faster in front of it. And we really should actually draw the ones that are in the far distance. We should draw these first. Okay, but then after that, we gradually build up the speed here, I mean the size. Build them up to, let's see, what's this size going to be? That's good. Let's go bring this one to a step distance of, I say about 9. And keep the Alt key down and start painting. And do that a few times until we'll just be bored of it, right? And so now we have created an animation that's kind of a manually painted assembly of these spaceships. They all look the same, they all wobble. That's a little bit suspicious, obviously, but it shows you the technique, right? And that's not the one we want to use, though, because we want to also change the size. We want them to gradually, as they disappear towards, they fly towards that hot star there in the far left. They're not going really the way we're seeing them go here. So what we want to do is actually a slightly different animation, which means we are going to be happy that we saved it. Let's go save this one here, and we call this one here test 1. Okay, and now we'll go back to. There it is. That takes a little bit longer to save now because we have so many more frames. Let's load or open the animation. That was version 4. This one here, I think Flares 4 with the 400. Yep. And so that one is the one we have with the background, but without the spaceship yet. Now let's make sure we click on the brush to have that brush there. We can preview it to see it. There it is. Maybe we need it a little bit bigger. And inside the coming up, yellow. All right, here we go. Inside the animation menu, we have the ability to go to the brush keyframer. And with the brush keyframer, what you can do is actually keyframe the position, the size, the rotational angle, even transparency or opacity of the spaceship. So here's our spaceship, that's the brush, and it's the animator brush. So as we scrub through the animation, it's also scrubbing through the brush. It's selecting one frame after the next of the animator brush. And so you have a video of this spaceship placed on top of a video of this background star system. And what we'll do is we'll have him arrive from the outside, initially invisible, and it will go along this path somewhere around here. So we'll place him here, maybe make him a little bit smaller. And you know, we can actually resize this window. It's great. It doesn't force you to be full size there. And also even the aspect ratio is kind of ignored, which can be handy if you need more leeway to move the spaceship out of the way here. So let's put them around there and keep it relatively good in size. And you know, we may need to tilt it a little bit downwards like so. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll position it here to the left. That'll be on our first frame, somewhere around here. Keyframe that, and then we'll go all the way to the end, and towards the end the spaceship will be close to the star, or at least diving into this plasma cloud, but it will also change the size because you know, perspective is going to make it disappear close to it. So it's going to be roughly around here. And keyframe that. So we have a single path there. We could actually give it a slightly different path if we wanted to. Let's give it a linear transition there so we don't see that glitch at the very end for the last frame. But what we could do is actually move him a little bit closer here and change the size to this for that spot in time. So it's almost slowing down at that point. See how it's coming and then it's kind of slowing down and then it's maybe changing course. We could also actually do some post work there later on the engines to fire the jet engines a little bit just at the right time to show a change in course or change in speed. In fact, you know what? We'll do just that. We'll move them around here initially. And oh, it looks like I have 2 keyframes there. Let me see if I can zoom into that. I'm gonna need to get rid of one of them there. So we still have that original one. Let me see if I can get rid of this one too. There you go. So I'm going to actually position it right around here, and scale it down a little bit more. There you go. And keyframe that. And if we do this as a spline transition, it'll be smoother. But keep in mind, there's this little glitch at the very end. The last, I think it's a cumulative error or something with the algorithm. It's doing the frame is going to be a jump that we need to delete. But one thing we could also do is show perhaps that it's being attracted by a black hole or some sort of a gravity force or something. So we might even want to have it spin, like here, have it lose control here, perhaps change the angle like so, and then here even more so. Just keep, or maybe go back. No, it's not natural. There you go, that's natural, right? And then rotate it even more. And in fact, we don't need to keyframe it frame by frame. What we can do is we can just go to the last one and just say, give it a full turn. There you go, you can say, let's make it a full turn for that. So now we actually have it spin out of control like this, right? If that's the mission that this particular scene requires. You could perhaps actually have it really disappear right in there. Let's go all the way down there, small size. There you go, and keyframe that. So we have we really have it sort of disappear there into the abyss of the black hole. So let's go render that. That would be right there. This is this version hasn't been released yet. I think in your case you may see the render button at the bottom. We're doing some changes in the layout for improved productivity, because sometimes you have a very small window and you still want to see that render button ultimately. So there we go. That will hopefully explain how we did this animation that we saw at the very beginning. Let's quickly browse through this one right now just to get a final look. And there it is. And if we want to go back to that other one I did a little bit earlier with a different flight path, but still had very similar impression. Let's go to animation and load. I have an AVI version. Let's go load that one. I think this one here, that's the smaller. Let's load the big one here. This one's HD 1280 by 720. Now this one takes a little bit longer to load, frame by frame from the AVI file, and almost there. There you go. And let's go play that. All right, thanks for watching.